Yo, what's up, y'all? This is Josh Tongol here, and this is episode numero uno, number one for the Flipside. What? Yup, that's right. I'm here in California starting up a new podcast, so let's do this. You know, some of you might be wondering, Josh, I thought you already have a podcast, man. Well, it's a bit different now. I got a new name, a new format, and now I'm talking directly to you guys. Because some of you guys already know, like before, I basically just extracted the audio from my YouTube videos, where I'd be speaking in front of a crowd, and I guess it'd be sort of impersonal when you're just hearing the audio. So now I just want to get a little more personal. Some of you know who I am, and some of you don't, and it's all good. So for those who are new to this podcast, you're probably wondering, who the heck is this guy? And that's a good question. So who am I? I'm an author, a speaker, a YouTuber, husband to my beautiful wife, Remy, and a person who loves to learn by asking a lot of questions. And I love watching movies and TV shows. Dude, sometimes I feel like the TV shows are even better than movies, you know what I'm saying? And I grew up watching martial art movies. I love thrillers and solving, crime stories and all that stuff, watching comedy movies. I'm a bit of a goofball, and I love to laugh a lot. Right? And I love Korean barbecue. Anyone else out there love Korean barbecue? Dude, it's like I gotta have my Korean barbecue fix once in a while, you know what I'm saying? Or I start to struggle. And I love b-boying, aka breakdancing. It's something that I started doing back in elementary school, but I no longer do it these days. I actually stopped. I think my last battle was back in 99. It was a fun thing to do. I still watch it every day on YouTube pretty much whenever I get the chance. So that's a little of my personal stuff, at least on a lighter note, but before I tell you a little more about myself, let me ask you a very important and maybe uncomfortable question. You ready? What if everything or almost everything you were taught about your faith, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or whatever, is wrong? And now I know it can be a scary question for some of you to even think about. Some of you are probably like, dude, I won't even go there, man. But seriously, though, what if? Would you give up on faith altogether? Would you be like, that's it, just screw it, screw religion, I want nothing to do with it? Or is it possible to rediscover a richer and a more satisfying understanding of spirituality? Or should I just say life? Now, let me share a little bit of my journey with you folks. I was born into fundamentalist Christianity. I was born into a Christian home with Christian parents. It was like Protestant Christianity. Prior to that, my parents were Roman Catholic. But growing up, I was part of something that was called the Pentecostal tradition, probably up until my late teens. For those who don't know what Pentecostal tradition is, I'm not going to get all into the history and stuff, but we were the Christians that did a lot of speaking in tongues and healing and all that kind of stuff. Then by the age of 17, I had certain experiences, and then I ended up becoming more conservative theologically when it came to what's considered to be the quote-unquote miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit. And I actually ended up leaving the Pentecostal church I grew up in and found the whole scene to be kind of crazy and distasteful, to be honest. From then on, I had this crazy obsession with something called apologetics, and no, it's not when you go around and apologizing to people saying, I'm sorry. It's actually a defense of the faith. Muslims have their apologists too, but I was, into Christian apologetics, obviously, and I guess you could call it part of the whole intellectual Christianity deal. And so during that time, I actually read every book I could find on apologetics, and my desire, which is interesting to think about it these days, my desire back then was to eventually travel the world and defend the quote-unquote Christian faith against all the false religions and false worldviews. And my gosh, things have changed. But I the thing is, I wanted to learn apologetics directly from the scholars that I admired, who I admired so much. So in my early 20s, I started studying under some of the well-known theologians and philosophers and apologists that I would read about in books. And, it was actually at a popular evangelical school in California. And then during those years, I first served as an apologetics teacher at a Presbyterian church in K-Town in LA. And then I eventually served as a pastor at a Southern Baptist church. And then unexpectedly, and I'll probably talk about this story one day in the future, I actually experienced a radical shift in my views about certain things. And so I ended up leaving the Southern Baptist church. Then after that, I eventually served as an evangelist at an Assemblies of God denomination. And then from my mid to late 20s, I was heavily involved in something called the charismatic movement. And just to talk about how I was involved in it, I mean, it was stuff where we emphasize a lot on healing, the prophetic, revival. And then I was busy traveling and speaking around the country and sometimes even abroad. So I guess you could say I've been around, you know what I'm saying? I eventually graduated from seminary. Yep, I went to seminary and I got a master's in theology. I became a missionary to the Philippines right after that. And for those who don't know, Philippines is a predominantly Roman Catholic country. And then after my first year in the Philippines, I actually decided to go back to the States right away because of some crazy stuff that was happening. But then all of a sudden, I meet my wife, or the girl who was going to eventually be my wife. And so I ended up staying, of course, a little longer in the Philippines. And the thing is, my wife, her background is she actually grew up in the Middle East her entire life, man. It's pretty interesting. And she lived in Thailand for a while because she studied film. And then right after Thailand, she went to the Philippines. Then bam, 2 weeks after she arrived to the Philippines, we met each other and we got together right away. And then we ended up getting married and doing what many people would consider ministry for several years before we moved out here to America. So here's the thing. All right, from the start of my adult life, I've always been the type to ask questions, okay? But during those years in the Philippines, it's crazy, but I finally found the courage to really ask questions. I mean, I'm talking about sincerely questioning some of my fundamental beliefs as a evangelical Christian. Because back then, I'll admit it now, I asked questions for sure, but I was already assuming that my religion was true and had all the answers. You know what I'm saying? And so even though I studied a bunch of arguments against Christianity, I read books on atheism and, skeptic books and all that kind of stuff. And even though some of them actually made sense to me at the time, I wouldn't tell anybody. You know why? And I'll be honest now, I was just too stinking scared to admit it. I mean, just think about it. I was a preacher, I was a missionary, and I just couldn't let go of some of my core beliefs as an evangelical Christian. I mean, just to think, man, have I been living a lie my whole life? And just kind of having that thought cross my mind, it wasn't a good feeling. So what did I always end up doing at the time when I would read material against my faith that actually made sense? Here's what I would do. I'd actually read more Christian books, apologetics, philosophical books and stuff from a Christian point of view. And I listened to more Christian material, lectures and stuff like that. That would just affirm what I already believed and whatever I already assumed, right? Did you get that? I did all those things. I read Christian material just to confirm what I was supposed to believe as a Christian, so I can acknowledge that now. But back then, I wasn't really open-minded, right? I'm willing to admit that now. But then with all the nagging thoughts and genuine questions and eye-opening experiences that I was having, I just knew, man, just in order to be true to myself, it was time for me to finally let some of my beliefs go, even if it was uncomfortable at times, but yet it was natural at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Just this process that I was going through. And my wife and I, we left the institutional church back in the Philippines in 2009. And what I mean by institutional church that I see, I'm basically just talking about a building or a meeting, you know what I'm saying, where you probably go on a Sunday and then you meet up for a program where there's worship music and a sermon and they collect tithes and offerings, stuff like that. That's just how I'm defining it right now. We stopped going to those kind of meetings back in 2009. And, we would only attend services whenever I was invited to speak somewhere because I was still a missionary. I was still a preacher. And it's a good idea to attend a service when you're invited to speak somewhere, right? And so we still had a community, which was pretty cool. It was a group of my friends. We had a group of friends. But it was a lot different than what a typical church on Sunday looks like. There were no programs or anything like that. Like, we were just like a family. It was just like one of the most amazing experiences that I've had of community. And then once we arrived to the States back in 2012, I found out that a good number of Christian friends and churches and ministries that I knew personally weren't too happy with me. They wanted nothing to do with me. And I got some crazy stories. I mean, they wanted nothing to do with me because I was questioning a lot, because I was challenging a lot of traditions. But I knew my heart, and my wife knew my heart, and my closest friends, they knew my heart. You know what I'm saying? And I knew that I had a message to share still. So I started writing, then in 2014, I published my first book called So You Thought You Knew, Letting Go of Religion, which is somewhat of a memoir, I guess you could say, and me deconstructing a lot of my religious beliefs, challenging the biggies of fundamentalist Christianity, like the certain version of God, like, the violent God that we see throughout the Bible, the whole idea of inerrancy, of whether or not the Bible is true, the gospel, what's the gospel, what does a cross mean, did Jesus die in my place, stuff like that, even the whole idea of eternal hell, which was a pretty hot topic a couple of years ago. Is hell forever? Does the devil exist? Do non-Christians go to hell when they die because they're not saved or believe in Jesus the way that I do? And so the book pissed off a good number of people, but at the same time, thankfully, it helped a lot of people as well. And after writing that book, I wasn't done yet, man, because at least when it came to my beliefs, and I'm still not done, because just because I let go of some of my older beliefs, it didn't mean that I had something to replace them with right away. So as I started to question even more stuff about life and theology and all that stuff, just kept evolving. Surprisingly, I began to embrace ideas that I used to condemn back in the day, which is a trip, right? Which eventually led to my second book that I published earlier this year called The Secret to Awesomeness. Now, don't be fooled by the fun title, because the topics in the book are ones that I believe almost every human being thinks about or even struggles with at times. And there are even some mind-bending stuff in it that could definitely stretch a person's thinking, where they'd be like, dude, is this possible? So I wrote the book in an entertaining way, just wanting to reach a wider audience. And you can get both of those books on Amazon, just in case you're interested. But to keep being straight up with you guys, I've been pretty low-key these days. Not only have I not been attending church services, but I haven't been getting into heated theological debates, whether in person or even on Facebook, because sometimes, guys, it can just get pretty ugly, or, like, in my opinion, it could sometimes be a stinking waste of time, where just people are throwing a bunch of Bible verses back and forth. No one's really open. I mean, they just want to be right. You know what I'm saying? So honestly, I just didn't want to make time for stuff like that. So for a period, I made, and some of you guys probably noticed this, but for a period, I made a lot of motivational videos on YouTube. And I was staying away from, I guess you could call it religious topics, at least publicly, right? But here's the thing. In private, I was still meeting up with people and helping people who were questioning or shedding religion. Because I've seen the damage it's done, folks. I've seen the abuse. I've seen the indoctrination. And those who I'd meet were the ones who were ready to be honest with themselves about their journey. Because people still turn to me for help. I get messages like every single day. And sometimes these people want to meet up. So I can't meet up with everyone, but I would meet up with some of them, or I'd run into someone at Starbucks. This just happened just recently too. Like, I was at Starbucks and then someone recognized me from YouTube and they're like, oh, could we sit down? And I just want to ask you a bunch of questions, So I did. And we chatted for like 2 to 3 hours, and this guy was like at a place where he was confused in his journey as a Christian. He's trying to make all the pieces in the puzzle fit, but a lot of it just wasn't making sense to him. So it's just like stuff like that. Almost every day, I'd study, I'd research, I'd listen to like a religious or philosophical debate. I'd have conversations with people who are wanting me to convert to their religion, things like that, because I was still interested in people's stories. You know what I'm saying? And what they had to say, why they believed what they believed. And, so I couldn't shake off that part of me and forget where I came from, as if those things were never part of my life. But like I said, for the most part, I kept quiet online. Then recently I thought, I can't believe it took this long. You know what? I don't want to keep all this stuff I'm thinking about and learning all to myself or just to those close to me. And obviously, I can't meet up with everyone, but I think these conversations that I'm having privately with others and even the conversations that I'm having in my own stinking mind, man, seriously, it could actually help a lot of people out there. Just start to think out loud and see if someone can resonate with what I'm thinking at the moment. And so here I am doing this podcast, and that's what it's about. It's about a journey. It's about me just wanting to help people, anybody out there who feels that they could relate to what I'm saying, and it's just wanting to have a conversation. And trust me, I'm not going to hold back. I ain't going to pull any punches. I ain't going to sugarcoat anything. I want this podcast to be straight up raw and just be honest. And like a lot of people, I know what it's like to live in fear, dude. I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be immersed in legalism. I know what it's like to be told to believe stuff that seems to have no effect in my life or just like totally irrational. And I also know what it's like to have doubts. I know those things. This show is an attempt to think outside the box, so to speak, and ask the hard questions. The questions that a lot of people are too afraid to ask without feeling guilty. You know what I'm saying? And I don't claim to have all the answers. Trust me, I don't. But I am here to question some of the answers that many of us have been given. Because some of us were given certain ideas, sold certain ideas that just didn't stinking work and have done more damage than good. We were told what to believe, how to think, and how to live. And I'm saying, now is the time to ask the question, what if? What if? What if everything or almost everything you were taught about religion or life is wrong? Think about it. What if? Or maybe everything you were taught is right. Who knows? Right? But in future podcasts, we're going to be exploring certain ideas, certain paradigms, and just start engaging and seeing the other side of things, which is sort of how I came up with the name of this podcast, The Flipside. Now, if you're Filipino or Pinoy, you might take it a certain way, because back in the day, it was pretty common, we'd be called flips. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like a cool term to use back in the day. I don't really hear it anymore. But that's not what I'm talking about here, right? And so the standard definition of flip side is that it's just like another aspect or version of something, or it's a side of the record that has a song which isn't as popular as the one known on the other side. So in other words, this podcast is where I'm going to talk about the quote-unquote other side of things, the other ideas that you probably don't hear because they may not be as mainstream or the status quo, but they could seriously, if they're true, mess you up in a good way and possibly change your life forever, just like how many ideas have changed my life forever. And just to be clear, this isn't a Christian podcast. It's not. This isn't a I Hate Religious People podcast either. It's a podcast about life, man. It's a podcast about things that have helped shape me. And it's a podcast where I'm wanting to help you to think for yourself. But obviously, I'll be talking about some religious topics in some episodes because that's my background. And I'm just hoping some people will be able to relate to my stories. But I'll also be talking about healing, personal development, pop culture. A bunch of different things, dude. So I already have a lineup of people of who I plan on interviewing for the show, like artists, filmmakers, theologians, philosophers, scientists, entrepreneurs, authors. People from all walks of life, like anyone who I think would be a good fit for the show. So we're just getting started, y'all. And I think that's it for now. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts and stories and questions and feedback. You can go to my website, joshuatongol.com, and go to the podcast section and leave your comments there. I'd love to build a community there and get to know you guys more. Maybe some of the podcasts could be based upon our conversations. Just for a heads up, all the links and resources that I mentioned on any of the shows, they'll be in the description, right? So you don't have to worry about that. And subscribe to this podcast. It's just with a click of a button, you subscribe and you'll never miss an episode. Also join a mailing list on joshuatongol.com and receive any of my updates and videos and free offers or special offers. And if you could please do me a huge favor, if you could please review and rate the show. It only takes a few minutes or possibly even a minute because it really helps with the ranking so people can find the show. That would mean a lot to me if you can do that. And lastly, since this is the first episode especially, Can you please help me spread the word by sharing this podcast on your Facebook or Twitter or Google Plus or word of mouth or whatever you're using? And I'd love to see this podcast take off and reach as many people as possible. And if you enjoyed the show, let me know. That would actually mean a lot to me because it would motivate me to keep making more episodes. I'll also provide a link to make it easier for you to share it as well online. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.